Our story continues. A sense of disquiet pervaded Odyssean in his sleep. He felt as if some malevolent presence suddenly hovered over him, seeking his soul while he lay undefended. His uneasiness finally stirred him to waking. However, instead of finding some fiend, he awoke and looked up into Lilia's perfect face.
"Are you ill, my love?"
She whispered.
How long have you been there?
"I just returned. You look so peaceful. I did not wish to disturb you. I apologize if I did."
Odyssean frowned. Now that he was awake, the disquiet magnified. Only it seemed to have more to do with their surroundings.
Lilia, go join the others by the fire. Go. Right now.
"Why?
Her eyes now widening.
What's the matter?"
Just do it.
Rising swiftly, he all but pushed the blonde-haired woman to the center of the camp. But to his dismay, he saw that only Mendeln was present.
Where is Achilleos? Where is Seri?
Achilleos has gone hunting. I believe Cerynthia should be nearby. She only went to gather a bit more wood.
"I'm sure that she'll be back shortly. There is no cause for concern, Odyssean,"
she said, attempting to calm the farmer. But he felt otherwise. Something was close, very close. Something. There was a rustling sound from behind Mendeln. Startled, Mendeln moved toward the others. Cerynthia stepped into the campsite. Odyssean began to exhale, but then another, dark-haired figure joined the trader's daughter. He was even slightly taller than Odyssean. While slimmer, he was clearly very fit. He wore a kindly expression, and his manner reminded Odyssean in some ways of his father. But all that became moot when he realized just what garments the man wore. They were those of a cleric, of the Temple of the Triune, a high-ranking one at that.
"Odyssean, I have a friend with me. His name is Malik, and he wants to help."
Odyssean hid his frown. She, of all people, should have known how he would react to the cleric's presence, especially after the chaos of Sarum. True, she had always been a believer, but what was she thinking?
I have come to offer the protection of the Triune,
Malik graciously added, spreading his gloved hands as if to show that he carried no weapon. The flames of the campfire reflected brilliantly in his gaze, which seemed to fix on Odyssean with an almost magnetic pull.
This child has told me of the terrible injustice perpetrated on you in the name of the Cathedral of Light. The Triune frowns on such monstrous behavior. We would keep you from threat from these agents of the Prophet.
Despite everything that had happened to him, despite his deep abhorrence of Malik's ilk, Odyssean half found himself wanting to listen to the man. There was just something understanding about the cleric. He seemed somehow able to feel and understand the pain that was still buried deep within the farmer's gut. Odyssean opened his mouth to welcome the man to their camp, but at that moment the fire erupted briefly, bursting to a height greater than that of the cleric. Malik instinctively pulled back from the wild flames, and as he did, he also tore his gaze from Odyssean. Odyssean felt as if a blanket had been pulled away from his head, as if he had been blind and could now see again. It was then that he realized that Malik had briefly mesmerized him.
Seri,
he roared, his rage now immediately beginning to swell.
Come to me, hurry.
At first, it was as if she didn't hear him, or for some reason she could not obey. Then, with a violent shiver, she cried out and fled from Malik's side. Malik belatedly reached for her, then glared at Odyssean. No sooner had Cerynthia escaped than the camp filled with hooded and armored figures, either on horseback or on foot. Odyssean had not seen their like before. Peace warders, they might call themselves. But the warriors of the Triune were no better than cutthroats condemned by the unlamented brother Michaelius. All they sought was control of the minds and souls of the people. Those who did not kneel, those like Odyssean, they found ways to condemn. In a blink of an eye, the farmer relived the calamity of Sarum. He saw the hatred and heard once more the lies.
No, not again,
He growled at the oncoming figures, and the air in front of him rippled. As if struck by an invisible hand, the Peace Warders went flying back in every direction. 2 crashed against nearby trees, striking so hard that they wrapped around the trunks like vines. Another flew several yards, disappearing into the foliage. The rest lay scattered and stunned around the outskirts of the campsite.
Impressive,
Malik declared in the same fatherly voice. But unlike his minions, he stood untouched by whatever force had acted upon them.
What you could be taught, with just a little conditioning. What you could be taught.
His eyes narrowed, once more the flames reflecting strongly within them. A heavy weight all but crushed Odyssean to his hands and knees. He felt as if it would soon bury him in the hard soil. Every muscle strained, every vein pounded, his head seemed ready to explode. He turned his gaze aside, but still he could not break free of whatever spell the cleric cast. He saw that Mendeln and Cerinthia suffered worse than him. Of Lilia, Odyssean could see nothing, but the thought of her fighting to survive gave him at last the impetus needed to push himself up onto one knee.
A very strong will. The master will savor breaking it further.
The force already pushing against Odyssean amplified even further. This time, his face smashed into the ground. A sharp pain exploded from the bridge of his nose, and he had no doubt that it was broken. Blood began dripping from his nostrils.
Bind him.
There was a scuffling of boots, Malik's servants rushing to obey him.
We have no need of the others.
That last statement echoed in Odyssean's mind, and with a pain-racked shout he forced himself up into a crouch. His head pounded and his heart strained, but a sense of triumph swelled within him. He found himself standing before 2 very startled Peace Warders. Before the stunned men could even recover, the son of Diomedes reached out and seized both men by the throat. His fingers had barely wrapped across, yet the cracking of bone was very audible. The Peace Warders twitched, then collapsed at his feet, their necks broken by something other than mere strength. Despite Odyssean's resurgence, Malik appeared only mildly impressed. He glanced at the fire that had broken his mesmerism, then looked again at Odyssean.
This could have been handled with so much more pleasantry, my child. There is a place for you in the temple. The Primus has sensed your power and would welcome you as a son. I want nothing to do with either you or him. A short-sighted choice, my child. The future of this land, of all lands, is the Temple of the Triune. Those who do not see the light shall forever fall into darkness.
But darkness was all that Odyssean saw when he looked at the high priest. In fact, Malik radiated a presence that repelled Odyssean as nothing else ever had, and he felt certain that it was the high priest's nearness that earlier stirred him into waking. The Peace Warders had quickly regrouped and were now surrounding the area. Cerinthia stood near Mendeln, who appeared lost in thought. Odyssean had finally located Lilia, who seemed to be as calm as Malik, but her calm evidently came from the confidence in her lover, her expression filled with utter trust in Odyssean's ability to save them. Strengthened by that, Odyssean finally said,
I said, I don't want anything to do with the temple. Leave now, or else. I truly regret the course you now force me to, my child. That the others must suffer more than they need to because of your recalcitrance is so sad.
His eyes narrowed dangerously.
So sad, and entirely your doing.
As the Peace Warders moved, at the same time, several pieces of burning wood leapt out of the fire. They fell to the ground just before Odyssean, where they immediately grew longer and thicker. Flames still surrounded them, but they no longer appeared to burn them any longer. As the shapes of the burning wood changed, they grew into the silhouette of a man and turned to face Malik.
Take him,
the cleric dispassionately ordered, and the fiery golem lunged toward Odyssean, its searing arms wrapped around his own in a hold worthy of a hangman's noose. The heat was unbearable. The flames all but blinded Odyssean. He shut his eyes, but the light of the fire seemed to cut right through the lids. Odyssean gasped for air, but all he received was a searing sensation throughout his lungs. Yet for all his agony, it should have been far worse. He should have been burned to death by now, flesh melted away and his bones blackened from the heat. But Malik did not want him dead, he recalled. Malik wanted him pliable, so that he may be brought before his master, the Primus. He might torture or bring him to the edge of despair, but the high priest would not dare chance killing the one for whom he had been hunting. That knowledge was enough for Odyssean to let out a defiant roar and push through the pain and free himself from the golem's grip. There was a sudden and intense chill, followed by a great clatter. Odyssean shook. As his eyesight finally cleared, it was to see a pile of smoldering sticks in front of him, all that remained of Malik's creation. Odyssean looked at his scorched arms and body, but noticed that they quickly started healing, turning from black and crimson to an unmarred fresh pink. Odyssean's sense of triumph quickly faded as his fear for Lilia and the others once again took hold. Unprotected, they could hardly have stood a chance, and yet all three remained untouched. Warriors of the Triune did indeed surround them, but that was all that they could manage. Odyssean saw one blade come at his brother, only to bounce away several inches from its target. A peace warder sought to seize Cerinthia, only to break his hands against the very air near her neck. Cerinthia nodded toward Odyssean. She understood, even if her attackers did not. She understood Odyssean's power. Lilia stood behind him with a calm appearance. She looked toward Odyssean with the knowledge that he would keep them from harm. It was enough to make Odyssean smile despite the circumstances, and that smile remained in place as he focused his attention on the cause of his troubles. For the first time, Malik no longer smiled or even acted disinterested. A frown cut across his face, and in his dark, dark eyes, Odyssean read a barely held fury behind them. The high priest raised a small jeweled box whose lid was turned so that when it would open toward his oafish adversary.
You bring this upon yourself. The master will have you alive, if only it is your barely beating heart I present to him, my child.
Odyssean flinched as the box opened, only to see that the box merely contained 3 glittering gems, a blue oval stone, a gold rectangular one, and the largest of all, a teardrop-shaped white diamond. It also seemed that a 4th gem should have been present, but its setting within the box was now empty.
You think you could bribe me into becoming a convert?
As Malik ran a finger over the gems, he said,
No, I think to make you beg me to let you.
Without warning, the peace warders abandoned their efforts, fleeing toward Malik as he focused on the empty area between he and Odyssean. The area was now filled with a noxious smoke, which was unlinked to the campfire or any other source. Odyssean, having faced mesmerism, crushing force, and an animated flame, felt unafraid of smoke. Taking a deep breath, he stepped forward. Once he was through the smoke, it would be a short distance to the cleric's throat. But as he began walking through the area, a shrill cry came from Lilia.
No, Odyssean, not like that. Beware of the lurkers.
No sooner had she called out that a shape formed before the farmer. Odyssean caught glimpses of what appeared to be razor-like appendages above what passed for 3 arms and a bulbous head that looked too heavy to be supported by any natural body. 4 glistening orbs burned a sinister ivory, and worst of all, it moved toward Odyssean. In the blink of an eye, a silvery aura shone around the creature. It gave out a low, gasping sound, then simply faded away. However, his relief was short-lived, as within the span of that moment, that one creature had vanished. 2 more shapes coalesced in the smoke, more grotesque than the last. One had a body that appeared to be freshly flayed, 2 legs ending in clawed hands, and a sinewy spiked tail. There was no head to the beast, just a gaping hole atop, out of which nightmarish and toothy projections snatched at the air just before Odyssean. The other hellish companion was a skeletal figure with the face of a hungry bird of prey, 2 leathery wings with appendages ending in sucklers, and its legs bent backwards like that of a grasshopper. Somewhere, farther back, somewhere beyond the smoke, Malik uttered a single word.
Lucian.
The avian creature leapt forward. Its speed was unbelievable. 1 second it stood before Odyssean, and the next it was upon him. Even as he fell under the force of its jump, he heard a deep grinding sound coming from the direction of the second beast. The appendages reached for his chest and throat. It was all that Odyssean could do to prevent them from reaching that goal, holding them up as high as he could. Amidst the onslaught, Odyssean could hear the sound of Malik commenting nonchalantly.
They will keep enough of you left alive, my child, for the Primus to work with. Just enough.
Odyssean tried dismissing them the way he had the fire golem, but these creatures seemed more like the hunter he fought earlier. However, he was certain that these creatures were far superior to that fiend. The long, sharp beak, which Odyssean expected to be snapping at him or even trying to spear his skull, instead opened wide and let out an ear-piercing shriek that rattled every bone in the farmer's body, a shriek without end or respite. With his ears pounding, Odyssean finally released one of the avian's arms and went for the beak. However, as he did, the appendage filled with suckers dropped down across his chest. A ghastly gnawing sensation arose wherever the creature's suckers touched. But Odyssean could not let that pain stop him any more than the last. Screaming through the pain, Odyssean seized the beak and clamped it tightly shut, the avian seeking release even as it continued to absorb what he could only assume was his life force. He was feeling lightheaded as he attempted to shove the beast off, but only then did he realize that something now had hold of his feet, and it began dragging him and the avian toward the direction of the other monstrosity. Odyssean, still unable to free himself, felt that whatever force had so far protected him was now failing horribly. He guessed it was because he was not used to wielding his power for so long and in such a desperate manner. He did not fear death. He knew the high priest wanted him alive. However, he also knew that he no longer cared in what condition Odyssean should arrive in. Odyssean feared what would happen to the others should he fail. Thoughts of Lilia's trusting face in particular flashed in his mind. They would all be slaughtered, if they had not been already. He had no ideas about their condition or if they were still protected, or for that matter, the state of Achilleos, who never returned from his hunt. It was likely that the archer had been the first to die, slain by the peace warders while still in the woods. A cold numbness began to spread upward, starting at the base of his feet. He knew that it must be whatever the avian was doing. Both demons had him now.
Lilia.
Odyssean barely managed. His body suddenly shook, and a tremendous, glorious strength filled the son of Diomedes. In an instant, he not only felt refreshed, but more powerful than ever before. The combined might of the two creatures now felt so utterly insignificant to him. Invigorated, Odyssean tightened his grip on the first demon's beak. This time, though, he had no intention of merely trying to turn it to the side. One small squeeze was all it took to crush its beak. The demon let out a garbled cry as it tried to rip itself free. Dark green ichor flowed from its shattered maw, dripping all over Odyssean. He ignored the burning caused by each rancid drop, eager to see what else he could do. The power surging through him roared like a river, feeding him continuously. He felt his body swell, feeling like a giant in comparison to his foes. A titan, perhaps even a god. Malik frowned, not for the first time. He sensed something was amiss. He couldn't understand Odyssean's destruction of the razor-like Pharaoh, the most foul of the servants given to him by his master. He was stunned more than he let on by this outcome. He had not even sensed the farmer's power rise up, so immediate had been the results. The other two demons summoned within the smoke seemed ready to make short work of Odyssean as well. Malik had even heightened his own senses to their peak, so that he could make sure that the creatures wouldn't get carried away, as demons do, and accidentally kill Odyssean. But even then, he couldn't understand the astounding and impossible surge of power that abruptly began coursing through what appeared to be, not a moment before, nothing more than a flailing, lost buffoon. It almost seemed to Malik as if it had been fed to Odyssean from another source. Tearing himself away from the struggle, he glanced at the three other figures. Malik immediately dismissed Cerynthia, who barely sensed her own force growing within her, and the perplexed-looking fool next to the girl, whom he had determined to be Odyssean's brother. He thought for a moment. There was something peculiar about his brother, but he was not the source. Malik then looked at the only other person left, the one whom he had originally viewed as being the least interesting to him. He looked at her very close, seeing her as only one of his skill could, seeing something that he could have never have guessed that he would see.
"Great Lucian,"
he blurted. For once he was unable to maintain the appearance of complete confidence and disdain. One hand came up to point, and the words of a spell formed on his lips. A sharp pain struck him in the back next to his left shoulder blade. Well versed in the human body and the various points of lingering or instant death, Malik surmised that what had struck him had been an arrow of incredible accuracy. Had it gone an inch more to the center, then even his power might not have been enough to save him. Be that as it may, he immediately set about using the gifts of his master to keep himself from not only bleeding to death, but passing out as well. He was no longer able to maintain control over the battle or deal with the other shocking discovery. As he began to turn, it was only there that he bared witness to Brother Rondo falling, slain by an arrow through the throat. Malik caught what appeared to be a glimpse of a lithe figure darting along the edge of the campsite, a mere archer of all things. It insulted and infuriated Malik to know that he had come so close to perishing because of someone without any skills whatsoever. He glanced back toward where Odyssean struggled. Malik heard an unsettling sound. At first he thought that perhaps one of his creatures, being rid of his control, had accidentally torn the farmer asunder. Instead, though, Odyssean once more stood free. Worse yet, in his left hand he held a limp body of the beaked demon who no longer had a beak. He watched as Odyssean tossed the dead creature aside and seized the next by its thick, sticky tongue, a tongue that Malik himself had witnessed freeze other mortals solid within a single heartbeat. Yet now, not only had Odyssean survived that cold, but he now dragged the last of Malik's infernal minions to him. The grinding teeth of the demon clamped down upon the farmer's wrists, but instead of the savage teeth, it shattered like brittle glass across this bare human flesh. Gritting his teeth, Odyssean grabbed the beak of the first demon, wielding it like a dagger, and then plunged it into the fleshy area just above his foe's monstrous maw. The demon squealed and dropped in an unsightly heap. Thick black fluid coursed down over its body from the great wound. As that happened, the arrow in Malik's back, forced by his will, popped free. He felt the last of his wound seal shut. Some pain remained, but most of his weakness came from the combination of his healing and his previous efforts to control the demons. This was not how it was meant to be, thought Malik, as he watched the lifeless bodies that remained of his demons. The Primus would be enraged with him. The High Priest shuddered at what form that fury might take. But what should have been a simple task was not. Malik still couldn't understand where things had gone awry. But he could not help but feel that there had been a piece in the game that not even the Primus had sensed. Impossible as that should have been. Malik noticed Odyssean making his way toward him. His gaze had an expression that reminded Malik very much of the anger of which he had thought that only the Primus capable. Unmindful of his minions, Malik quickly sought to protect himself, for the force that now struck him and his peace warders was easily 100 times greater. This time bodies went flying as if shot from catapults. Men screamed as they collided with tree trunks and tumbled through the woods. One peace warder struck an oak so hard that it cracked and crashed into its neighbors. Only Malik remained standing, if barely. He watched in disbelief as Odyssean grimly strode toward him. There was blood in the farmer's eyes, and the cleric knew that his would-be prey intended something far worse than anything unleashed so far for him. After seeing Odyssean, Malik did the wisest thing he could. A dust devil whirled to life just in front of Odyssean, swiftly raising up whatever loose fragments and debris it could. The makeshift storm filled Odyssean's face, momentarily blinding him. Malik began concentrating vigorously. Odyssean swatted away the thick cloud, angry at himself for having not expected something of the sort. Blinded, he prepared himself for the worst, certain that Malik had a second and far more insidious attack to follow. But as the dust settled, revealing in its aftermath, there was no sign of the High Priest. The son of Diomedes stood bewildered, awaiting some kind of trick. Yet Malik did not suddenly appear and attack. Instead, slim hands took hold of him from behind, and Lilia's voice declared,
"You've done it, Odyssean. You've saved us all from the cleric and his demons."
Odyssean surveyed the scene around him, seeing corpses of the peace warders, 2 abominations, and at least 3 of the warders with bolts through them, a sign that Odyssean had not been entirely responsible for protecting the party. Achilleus stood by Cerinthia's side, giving comfort for the traitor's daughter.
"Odyssean, forgive her carelessness, my love. She did not mean to endanger us."
Odyssean wanted to go to Cerinthia and explain to her that he understood that Malik had seized control of her mind, but he decided it was best to leave her in the care of Achilleus, who would do everything he could to see the distraught state remedied.
"You were amazing. Do you see now, my love? Do you see that nothing is beyond you? That nothing can prevent you from achieving what we dream?"
He had seen everything, but he was still in awe of his own abilities. The High Cleric of the Triune had set spell work, men and monsters against him, and had failed. What more could anyone fearing his existence do? Surely nothing. But they would try. And the others, especially Lilia, would have to depend on him until they too learned to fully awaken their force within him.
Let them come. Let him come.
Odyssean muttered without realizing it as he thought of Malik. Lilia came around to his side, her eyes glowing in the light of the campfire.
"Odyssean, did you hear what the cleric said? Did you hear the name?"
Name? What name?
Her lips drew close to him.
"Lucian," he said. The cleric called out a name, Lucian, to the demons.
She turned her gaze toward Mendeln, who was now just approaching.
You heard, did you not?"
Mendeln visibly paused to regroup his thoughts and then nodded in agreement. Lilia, glancing back at Odyssean.
"Yes, I heard that name from him. I did, Odyssean."
Yes, the same name the first demon called, and now Malik has used it too. Could there be a connection between the Triune and Lucian, between the Primus and the Master of Demons? Odyssean felt an intense uneasiness creep through him at the thought. Demons at the beck and call of the temple. What did it mean? And who, then, was the Primus? Whose name must also be Lucian?